Welcome to Bedtime Express, your nightly journey into peaceful sleep through the power of storytelling. I'm your conductor on this gentle voyage to the land of dreams. Tonight, we're traveling back through the centuries to Constantinople's magnificent Grand Bazaar, where merchants, spies, and secret dealers wove their tales across 500 years of history. You'll meet Byzantine silk merchants hiding imperial secrets, Ottoman spy masters gathering intelligence, Greek revolutionaries plotting in coffee houses, and agents from the great powers playing their dangerous games in the shadows of ancient corridors. Our story spans from 1453 to 1918, taking you through 5 interconnected tales of commerce, conspiracy, and survival in history's most legendary marketplace. Each chapter reveals how the Grand Bazaar served as a crossroads not just for trade, but for the hidden currents of power that shaped empires and changed the world. Before you fall asleep, please give us a like, leave a comment about your favorite moment, and subscribe to Bedtime Express for more peaceful adventures. Ring the notification bell so you never miss a departure to dreamland. Now, settle into your most comfortable position, close your eyes, and let your breathing slow and deepen. Allow the gentle rhythm of the story to carry you away from the concerns of the day. Tonight, you're not just a listener, you're a traveler stepping through the ancient gates of the Grand Bazaar, where every whispered conversation holds a secret and every transaction tells a story. All aboard the Bedtime Express. Our journey begins now. Tales from the Grand Bazaar. Merchants, spies, and secret deals. The morning mist clung to the cobblestones of the Grand Bazaar like whispered secrets refusing to dissipate. Sultan Mehmed II had conquered Constantinople just 3 months prior, and the great marketplace was slowly awakening to its new Ottoman reality. The familiar sounds of merchants calling their wares in Greek and Latin now mingled with Turkish and Arabic, creating a symphony of commerce that echoed through the vaulted corridors. Dimitrios Palaiologos adjusted the heavy silk bolts on his wooden cart, his weathered hands trembling slightly not from age, though he had seen 57 winters, but from the weight of the secret he carried. Hidden beneath the lustrous crimson silk from distant Samarkand lay documents that could reshape the delicate balance of power in this newly conquered city. Maps of hidden Byzantine treasures, lists of loyalist families, and most dangerous of all, correspondence between surviving members of the old imperial court. The bazaar's ancient stones seemed to absorb the morning light, casting everything in a golden amber glow that made reality feel dreamlike. Dimitrios had been coming to this same spot for 30 years, long before the conquest, when the market still hummed with the rhythms of a dying empire. His stall sat at the intersection of 2 major corridors, where the spice route met the silk road, a crossroads of cultures and currencies that had made him wealthy beyond most merchants' dreams. As he arranged his wares with practiced precision, Demetrios noticed a figure watching him from the shadows of a nearby carpet seller's stall. The man wore the simple robes of a dervish, but his eyes held an intelligence that spoke of courts and councils rather than mystical contemplation. This was Hassan Bey, one of the Sultan's most trusted advisors, though few knew of his true role as spy master of the new Ottoman administration. The morning progressed with its usual rhythms. Customers came and went, fingers trailing over silk that had traveled thousands of miles to reach these ancient stones. A Genoese merchant haggled over azure silk from China, his Latin mixing with Demetrios's careful Turkish. A wealthy Ottoman lady, heavily veiled, purchased enough golden silk to outfit her entire household for the coming winter celebrations. Each transaction was performed with the elaborate courtesy that had made the Grand Bazaar famous throughout the known world. But Demetrios's attention remained divided. Every few minutes, his eyes would drift to where Hassan Bey maintained his patient vigil. The spy master showed no signs of leaving, content to browse carpets and occasionally sip tea brought by a young apprentice. The waiting game had begun, and both men understood that in the Grand Bazaar, patience was often more valuable than gold. As the sun climbed higher, casting deeper shadows between the stalls, a new player entered the delicate dance. Anna Komnenos, great niece of the last emperor, approached Demetrios's stall with the measured steps of nobility, trying to appear common. Her dark hair was simply braided, her dress plain wool rather than silk, but no amount of disguise could completely hide the aristocratic bearing that had been bred into her bones. "Good merchant," she said in Greek, her voice carrying the educated accent of the Fana district. "I seek silk for a wedding dress. Something traditional, something that speaks of old Constantinople." Demetrios understood immediately. The wedding was merely pretext. Anna had come for the documents. But with Hassan Bey's eyes upon them, any obvious exchange would be suicide. The silk merchant's mind raced through possibilities, each option weighed against the risks of discovery. "Of course, noble lady," he replied, using the honorific despite her common dress. "I have silk that remembers the purple of emperors, though it now serves humbler purposes. Perhaps you would care to examine my finest pieces in the back of my stall, where the light is better." Anna nodded, and together they moved toward the rear of the shop, where bolts of the most expensive silk created a small, semi-private alcove. From his watching post, Hassan Bey observed the movement but made no immediate action. His patience was legendary. He had waited 3 years to uncover a Venetian spy ring, content to watch and learn until the moment was right. In the alcove's relative privacy, Demetrios began his careful dance of revelation. He pulled out bolt after bolt of silk, each one genuine but none containing what Anna truly sought. "This crimson speaks of imperial banquets," he murmured, letting his fingers trail over the fabric. "And this gold remembers the light of Hagia Sophia when it still echoed with Christian hymns." Anna played her part perfectly, examining each bolt with the critical eye of a bride-to-be. But her eyes asked the real question: where are the documents? Demetrios's answer came in the form of a seemingly casual gesture. As he reached for another bolt, his hand briefly touched a particular roll of crimson silk, one that looked identical to a dozen others but sat in a slightly different position. Anna's eyes followed the movement, memorizing the location. "The crimson is beautiful," she said, her voice carrying just enough emphasis to confirm she understood. "But perhaps something in imperial purple would be more appropriate for such an important occasion." "Purple silk is rare and expensive," Demetrios replied, the words carrying multiple meanings. "It requires special arrangements. Perhaps the lady would return this evening, when I can show her my most precious pieces." Their conversation continued for several more minutes, establishing the pretense of a legitimate transaction while laying the groundwork for the real exchange. Anna would return that evening just before the bazaar closed. Demetrios would have the documents ready, hidden in a specially prepared bolt of genuine purple silk, one of the last pieces to bear the imperial color before the conquest. As Anna departed, Demetrios felt the weight of anticipation settle over him like a heavy cloak. The day passed with agonizing slowness. He sold silk to a dozen customers, each transaction performed with automatic precision, while his mind remained fixed on the evening's dangerous rendezvous. The documents beneath the crimson silk seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour, their secret weight threatening to crush him. Hassan Bey remained at his post throughout the day, sometimes browsing carpets, sometimes simply sitting in contemplation. His presence was a constant reminder that the new order had eyes and ears everywhere. The Ottoman intelligence network was already proving itself more sophisticated than anything the Byzantines had possessed, and Demetrios wondered if his planned deception had any chance of success. As the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, a complication arose. A group of janissaries entered the bazaar, their distinctive white felt caps and curved swords marking them as elite soldiers of the new regime. They moved with the casual confidence of conquerors, examining goods with the knowledge that their sultan's gold made them welcome anywhere. The lead janissary, a tall man with intelligent dark eyes, approached Demetrios's stall. "Merchant," he said in accented Greek, "my commander seeks silk for his daughter's wedding. Nothing too ornate, we are simple soldiers, but something of quality." Demetrios bowed respectfully, his mind calculating rapidly. Janissaries were notoriously observant, trained to notice details that ordinary soldiers might miss. Any unusual behavior around the stall could draw unwanted attention, yet refusing their custom would be equally suspicious. "I am honored to serve the Sultan's finest warriors," Demetrios replied, selecting several bolts of mid-range silk, beautiful enough to satisfy a commander's pride, but not so expensive as to suggest excessive profit from defeated enemies. "Perhaps this blue silk from Damascus, or this green from Persian looms?" The Janissary examined the offerings with a critical eye, his trained attention missing nothing. His gaze lingered momentarily on the area where the documents lay hidden, but gave no sign of suspicion. After considerable deliberation, he selected the blue silk, counting out Ottoman gold coins with the precision of a man accustomed to handling valuable resources. As the soldiers departed, Demetrios felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cooling evening air. The incident had passed without incident, but it served as a stark reminder of how precarious his position had become. In the old Constantinople, he had been a respected merchant with connections throughout the city. In the new Ottoman capital, he was merely another Christian subject under constant scrutiny. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when Anna returned. The bazaar's crowds had thinned considerably, leaving only the most dedicated merchants and customers pursuing their final transactions of the day. Hassan Bey had finally abandoned his post, disappearing into the maze of corridors that connected the market to the wider city. Whether his departure was genuine or merely another layer of surveillance remained to be seen. Anna approached the stall with the same measured steps as before, but Demetrios could sense the tension beneath her composed exterior. The moment of truth was approaching, and both of them understood that any mistake could prove fatal. The Ottoman justice system was swift and thorough. Conspiracy against the state was punishable by death, and Sultan Mehmed had shown no inclination toward mercy for those who threatened his new order. "Good merchant," Anna said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "I have returned for the purple silk you mentioned. I trust you have prepared something suitable for such an important occasion." Demetrios nodded and moved toward the rear of his stall, where the most valuable silks were stored in cedar chests that protected them from dust and moisture. His hands shook slightly as he lifted the lid of the largest chest, revealing layer upon layer of the finest fabrics from across the known world. At the very bottom, wrapped in protective linen, lay a single bolt of silk dyed in the exact shade of imperial purple that had once adorned the robes of emperors. The silk was genuine. Demetrios had purchased it from a palace servant in the chaotic days following the conquest, when imperial regalia was being sold in secret to anyone with ready cash. But woven into its folds, invisible to casual inspection, were the documents that Anna had come to collect. Maps showing the location of hidden treasures, lists of Byzantine nobles who had escaped the city, and most importantly, letters that could be used to establish legitimacy for any future restoration attempt. "This purple silk is indeed precious," Demetrios murmured, lifting the bolt with reverent care. "It was worn by emperors in the great palace, blessed by patriarchs in Hagia Sophia. Such fabric carries not just beauty, but memory." Anna reached out to touch the silk, her fingers trembling slightly at the contact with both the imperial past and the dangerous present it represented. The documents were there. She could feel their subtle stiffness beneath the flowing fabric. Years of planning and risk had led to this moment, and success or failure now hung in the balance. "The price for such precious material must be considerable," Anna said, beginning the delicate negotiation that would establish the terms of transfer. "For ordinary customers, yes," Demetrios replied carefully, "but for one who appreciates its true value, perhaps we can reach an understanding that serves us both. The silk wishes to serve its proper purpose, and I am merely its guardian until the right moment arrives." Their conversation continued in veiled terms, establishing not just the immediate exchange, but the network of trust that would be necessary for future operations. Both understood that this single transaction was merely the beginning. If successful, it would open channels of communication and supply that could eventually challenge Ottoman rule itself. As they concluded their negotiations, neither noticed the slight figure that had appeared at the entrance to Demetrios's stall. Hassan Bey had returned, but not in his earlier guise as a browsing customer. Now he stood in the shadows, his trained ears catching fragments of conversation that confirmed suspicions he had harbored throughout the long day of watching. The spy master remained motionless as Anna carefully wrapped the purple silk in plain linen, transforming it from imperial treasure to innocent purchase. Every movement was observed, every word weighed for its true meaning. When Anna finally departed, walking with carefully controlled steps toward the bazaar's main entrance, Hassan Bey faced a decision that would determine the fate of all involved. He could arrest them immediately, securing quick confessions and eliminating a potential threat to Ottoman security. Or he could allow the network to continue operating, using it as a window into Byzantine resistance activities while gradually rolling up the entire organization. The choice required balancing immediate security against long-term intelligence value, a calculation that had made Hassan Bey invaluable to his sultan. As Demetrios began closing his stall for the evening, packing away the remaining silks with movements made automatic by decades of practice, he remained unaware that his every action was being catalogued and analyzed. The successful completion of the transfer had filled him with relief, but also with a growing sense of destiny. For the first time since the conquest, he felt that the future held possibilities beyond mere survival. The Grand Bazaar gradually settled into its evening quiet, the last merchants securing their stalls and counting the day's profits. Oil lamps flickered to life in the corridors, casting dancing shadows on walls that had witnessed centuries of similar scenes. 5. In this ancient marketplace, empires might rise and fall, but the eternal dance of commerce, intrigue, and ambition continued unchanged. Hassan Bey finally stepped from the shadows, his decision made. The network would be allowed to continue, watched and guided, until the moment came to harvest the intelligence it provided. Demetrios and Anna had no idea that their conspiracy was now serving Ottoman interests as much as Byzantine ones, a delicious irony that would have profound consequences for the city's hidden struggle between old and new loyalties. As night fell over Constantinople, the purple silk made its way through darkened streets toward its ultimate destination. The documents it carried would indeed help coordinate resistance activities, but every move would be observed, every plan known to those who held the city's true power. In the Grand Bazaar's eternal game of deception and counter-deception, the first moves had been played, setting the stage for dramas that would unfold across the centuries to come. 230 years had passed since the conquest, and the Grand Bazaar had evolved into something magnificent beyond even Sultan Mehmed's ambitious dreams. The morning of September 10th, 1683, found the marketplace humming with an energy born of both triumph and uncertainty. News had arrived the previous evening that the Ottoman siege of Vienna had been broken by a coalition of Christian armies, sending shockwaves through the imperial capital that even the bazaar's ancient stones seemed to absorb. Mirza Osman Effendi moved through the spice merchants' quarter with the measured pace of a man who understood that haste bred suspicion. His long robes rustled softly against the worn stones, the sound mixing with the endless symphony of commerce that echoed through the vaulted corridors. At 63, he had seen the Ottoman Empire reach its zenith under the late Sultan Suleiman, and now he witnessed the first cracks in what had seemed an eternal edifice. The spice stalls formed their own world within the greater bazaar, a realm where the treasures of distant lands were measured by the gram and sold by the handful. Cinnamon bark from Ceylon caught the morning light like tiny wooden jewels. Saffron from Persia glowed with the concentrated essence of 1,000 crocuses. Black pepper from the Malabar coast lay in fragrant pyramids, each peppercorn worth more than its weight in silver to the right buyer. But Mirza Osman's true business lay hidden beneath this legitimate commerce. For 15 years, he had operated one of the most sophisticated intelligence networks in the Ottoman Empire, gathering information from the caravans that brought spices from the furthest reaches of Asia and Africa. Merchants who traveled such distances carried more than trade goods. They brought news, rumors, and secrets that could reshape the balance of power across continents. Today's intelligence was particularly valuable. A caravan master from Baghdad had arrived 3 days ago with disturbing reports from the Persian frontier. Shah Abbas III was reportedly negotiating a secret alliance with the Holy Roman Emperor, planning to attack Ottoman territories from the east while European armies pressed from the west. If true, the empire faced the nightmare scenario of a coordinated assault on multiple fronts. Mirza Osman's destination was the stall of Haji Mehmet, a legitimate spice merchant whose extensive network of suppliers provided perfect cover for intelligence operations. The old merchant had inherited both his business and his covert duties from his father, who had served the empire with distinction during the reign of Sultan Ahmed III. 3 generations of loyalty had earned the family access to the highest levels of government, making them invaluable assets in the dangerous game of imperial intelligence. The spice merchant's stall occupied a prime location at the intersection of 2 major corridors, where foot traffic from both the European and Asian quarters converged in a constant stream of potential customers. Haji Mehmet stood behind his counter like a benevolent potentate, his white beard neatly trimmed, his silk kaftan rich but not ostentatious. To casual observers, he appeared to be nothing more than a successful trader who had prospered under Ottoman protection. "Peace be upon you, old friend," Mirza Osman said, approaching the counter with the familiarity of a regular customer. "I seek cinnamon for my household, the finest you have. For my daughter's wedding preparations require nothing but the best." "And upon you peace," Haji Mehmet replied, his eyes twinkling with understanding. The code words had been exchanged. Cinnamon indicated urgent intelligence, while the wedding reference meant the information required immediate transmission to the highest authorities. "Of course, Mirza Effendi. I have just received a shipment from Ceylon that surpasses even my usual standards. Perhaps you would examine it in my private chamber, where we can discuss the finer points of quality and preparation." The private chamber lay behind the main stall, accessible through a curtained doorway that led to a small room lined with cedar chests and copper vessels. Here, the most expensive spices were stored away from dust and moisture, creating an environment rich with the concentrated aromas of a dozen distant lands. But the chamber served another purpose. Its thick walls and strategic location made it ideal for confidential conversations. As they settled onto cushions arranged around a low brass table, Haji Mehmet prepared tea with the ritual precision that marked all important Ottoman social interactions. The familiar actions provided cover for conversation while demonstrating the respect due to serious matters of state. Steam rose from the delicate glasses, carrying with it the fragrance of bergamot and memories of countless similar meetings. "The cinnamon comes with interesting stories," Mirza Osman began carefully, using metaphorical language that had evolved over decades of covert operations. The merchants speak of unusual weather patterns in distant lands, storms gathering from multiple directions, threatening to converge upon the traditional trade routes. Haji Mehmet nodded gravely, understanding immediately that they were discussing military intelligence rather than meteorological phenomena. Such storms can indeed disrupt commerce, he agreed. Has your source provided details about the timing and intensity of these weather disturbances? The caravan master from Baghdad speaks of preparations beginning with the spring thaw, Mirza Osman replied. Wagons loaded with special cargo, moving along routes not typically used for ordinary trade. And there are reports of unusual meetings between traders who normally compete rather than cooperate. The intelligence painted a disturbing picture. If the Persian reports were accurate, the Ottoman Empire faced a coordinated attack by the Habsburg-Persian alliance sometime in the coming year. The defeat at Vienna had already damaged Ottoman prestige and encouraged enemies throughout Europe. A successful assault from the east could trigger a general uprising among subject peoples who had chafed under Ottoman rule. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Ibrahim Pasha, one of the Grand Vizier's most trusted advisors, entered the chamber with the quiet authority that marked high Ottoman officials. His presence immediately elevated the meeting from routine intelligence gathering to a matter of state security. "Gentlemen," Ibrahim Pasha said, accepting the glass of tea that Haji Mehmet quickly prepared, "I bring greetings from His Excellency the Grand Vizier. The recent developments at Vienna have created opportunities for enhanced cooperation between the government and its most valued friends in the commercial sector." The carefully chosen words carried multiple meanings. The defeat at Vienna had indeed created opportunities for enemies of the empire to exploit Ottoman weakness. Enhanced cooperation meant that intelligence operations would be expanded and intensified, and the reference to valued friends indicated that both Mirza Osman and Haji Mehmet were being elevated to a new level of responsibility within the intelligence apparatus. "We are honored by His Excellency's attention," Mirza Osman replied with formal courtesy. "Our humble efforts have always been dedicated to serving the Sublime Porte and protecting the interests of our sovereign lord the Sultan." Ibrahim Pasha nodded approvingly, then leaned forward to indicate the shift from pleasantries to serious business. "The reports from the eastern frontiers require immediate verification and expansion. His Excellency wishes to establish a new network of correspondence along the Persian routes, men of proven loyalty who can provide regular intelligence about enemy preparations." The request was both an honor and a dangerous burden. Establishing such a network would require significant resources and careful recruitment of reliable agents. More importantly, it would place Mirza Osman and his associates at the center of an intelligence operation whose failure could mean not just personal disaster, but strategic catastrophe for the empire. Such an undertaking requires careful planning, Haji Mehmet observed diplomatically. The merchants who travel these routes are independent, minded men who value their neutrality. Converting them into reliable agents will require incentives commensurate with the risks involved. Ibrahim Pasha smiled slightly, appreciating the delicate way the old spice merchant had raised the question of funding. His Excellency anticipated such practical concerns. The imperial treasury has allocated substantial resources for this endeavor, enough to ensure that Ottoman gold speaks more persuasively than Persian promises or European threats. The discussion that followed established the framework for an intelligence network that would stretch from Constantinople to Isfahan, from Baghdad to Bukhara. Mirza Osman would serve as the central coordinator, using his established contacts among spice merchants and caravan masters to recruit agents and establish secure communication channels. Haji Mehmet would provide operational cover, using his legitimate business to explain the increased flow of personnel and resources through his establishment. As they refined the operational details, none of the three men noticed the slight figure that had taken position near the chamber's single window. Elena Paleologu, great-great-granddaughter of the Ana, who had once collected Byzantine documents from a silk merchant, crouched in the narrow alley that separated Haji Mehmet's stall from the adjacent building. Her family had maintained their resistance activities across the generations, adapting their methods to changing circumstances while preserving their ultimate goal of Orthodox Christian liberation. The intelligence she gathered from her precarious listening post would prove invaluable to the network of Christian agents that had evolved from Demetrios's original conspiracy. Knowledge of Ottoman intelligence operations could be traded to European powers for gold, weapons, and promises of future support. More importantly, understanding the empire's intelligence priorities would help resistance networks avoid detection while pursuing their own objectives. Inside the chamber, Ibrahim Pasha was concluding his instructions with the precision that had made him one of the Grand Vizier's most effective administrators. Regular reports will be expected every 2 weeks, transmitted through established diplomatic channels. Any intelligence suggesting imminent military action must be communicated immediately, regardless of normal procedures. The empire's survival may depend upon the speed and accuracy of information flowing through this network. The weight of responsibility settled over Mirza Osman like a heavy cloak. At his age, he had hoped to gradually withdraw from active intelligence work, leaving the dangerous aspects to younger men while retaining an advisory role. Instead, he found himself thrust into the center of operations that could determine the fate of the Ottoman Empire. The irony was, Not lost on him, the empire's hour of greatest need coincided with his own advancing years. As Ibrahim Pasha departed, the two merchants remained in the private chamber, sipping their cooling tea while contemplating the magnitude of their new assignment. The familiar aromas of cinnamon and cardamom provided comfort, anchoring them in the commercial world they understood, even as they prepared to venture deeper into the treacherous realm of international espionage. "The young men today lack patience," Haji Mehmet observed, breaking the contemplative silence. "They expect immediate results, dramatic victories that can be celebrated in the coffee houses. But intelligence work requires the slow cultivation of trust, the gradual building of relationships that may not bear fruit for years." Mirza Osman nodded in agreement, his mind already working through the challenges ahead. "We must identify merchants who travel regularly to Persian territories, men whose loyalty can be purchased or whose existing grievances against the Shah can be exploited. The network must appear to grow naturally from existing commercial relationships, avoiding any suggestion of artificial construction." Their planning session continued well into the afternoon, interrupted periodically by legitimate customers who required Haji Mehmet's attention. Each interruption provided an opportunity to refine their operational security, ensuring that their expanded activities would not attract unwanted attention from competitors or authorities. The Grand Bazaar had always been a place where business and intrigue intersected, but the current situation demanded unprecedented levels of caution and sophistication. As evening approached and the bazaar's crowds began to thin, Elena Paleologu finally abandoned her listening post. The intelligence she had gathered would require careful analysis and swift transmission to her own superiors. The Byzantine resistance network had evolved considerably since her ancestors' time, developing connections with Venetian merchants, Russian Orthodox churches, and even Protestant powers who saw Ottoman weakness as an opportunity for their own advancement. The information about Ottoman intelligence operations in Persia could be particularly valuable to Russian agents operating in the Caucasus region. Tsar Peter I had his own ambitions regarding Ottoman territories, and advanced knowledge of imperial intelligence priorities could provide crucial advantages in the complex diplomatic and military maneuvering that would inevitably follow the Vienna debacle. Back in the spice merchant's chamber, Mirza Osman and Haji Mehmet were finalizing their initial operational plans. The network would begin modestly, with approaches to 3 carefully selected merchants who already maintained regular contact with Persian suppliers. Each recruitment would be handled differently, tailored to the individual's personality, financial situation, and existing loyalties. Ahmed ibn Yusuf travels to Isfahan every 6 months, Mirza Osman noted, referring to a carpet merchant whose stall lay 2 corridors away. His brother was executed by Persian authorities 5 years ago, on charges of smuggling a grievance that might make him receptive to our approaches. But we must be certain of his discretion before revealing the true nature of our interest. And Mahmud al-Baghdadi maintains excellent relations with caravan masters throughout Mesopotamia, Haji Mehmed added. His routes provide natural cover for intelligence gathering, and his reputation for reliability would make his reports credible to government officials. However, his loyalty will certainly require significant financial incentives. The third candidate presented more complex considerations. Dimitri Kantakouzenos, a Greek merchant who specialized in precious stones, traveled extensively throughout the Persian and Russian territories. His Orthodox faith and family connections to the old Byzantine nobility made him potentially valuable, but also potentially dangerous. His recruitment would require the most delicate handling, balancing the advantages of his access against the risks of his divided loyalties. As night settled over the Grand Bazaar, the two conspirators concluded their planning session with the solemn understanding that they had committed themselves to an endeavor that would test their skills, their courage, and their loyalty to the empire that had given their families prosperity and purpose. The spices surrounding them in their aromatic profusion served as silent witnesses to their oath, carrying within their essence the memory of distant lands and the promise of adventures yet to come. The ancient stones of the marketplace absorbed their whispered plans just as they had absorbed countless similar conspiracies over the centuries. In the Grand Bazaar's eternal cycle of commerce and intrigue, empires might rise and fall, but the essential human dramas of ambition, loyalty, and survival continued unchanged. The stage was set for a new chapter in the endless story of those who served power and those who sought to challenge it, all within the confines of history's most magnificent marketplace. The aroma of roasted coffee beans mingled with tobacco smoke in the dim recesses of the Café Sublime, one of dozens of coffee houses that had sprouted throughout the Grand Bazaar like mushrooms after rain. It was March 15th, 1821, and revolution was in the air like incense in a cathedral. Just weeks earlier, news had reached Constantinople of Alexander Ypsilantis crossing the Pruth River with his sacred band, calling for Greek independence from Ottoman rule. The echo of that distant trumpet call reverberated through every corner of the empire, reaching even into the ancient stones of the Grand Bazaar. Yanis Mavrogenes sat in his customary corner, a brass coffee pot cooling before him as his dark eyes surveyed the room with the practiced vigilance of a man who had lived too long with secrets. At 45, he had spent half his life moving between the worlds of commerce and conspiracy, using his successful import business as cover for activities that would have earned him immediate execution if discovered. Today, the familiar weight of danger felt heavier than usual, pressing down upon his shoulders like the accumulated burden of 20 years of careful deception. The Café Sublime occupied a strategic position within the Bazaar's labyrinthine layout, accessible through 3 different entrances and connected to the wider marketplace by a network of passages that had evolved organically over centuries of commercial activity. Coffee houses had become the unofficial forums of Ottoman intellectual life, places where merchants, scholars, and government officials gathered to debate politics, philosophy, and the endless rumors that swirled through the imperial capital like autumn leaves in a courtyard. But this particular establishment served purposes beyond casual discourse. Hidden behind its facade of commercial respectability lay one of the most important cells of the Filiki Eteria, the secret society dedicated to Greek independence. For 7 years, Yanis had used the coffee house as a meeting place for conspirators, a recruitment center for revolutionary sympathizers, and a communications hub for the underground network that stretched from the Danubian principalities to the rocky islands of the Aegean. The morning's intelligence had arrived through carefully established channels carried by a wool merchant from Thessalonica who maintained legitimate commercial relationships throughout the northern provinces. The news was both encouraging and terrifying. The revolution that had begun with Ypsilantis's desperate gamble was spreading faster than anyone had dared hope. Uprisings had begun in the Morea. The islands were declaring independence, and Orthodox Christians throughout the empire were beginning to believe that liberation might actually be possible. Yanis sipped his coffee slowly, the bitter liquid providing a familiar anchor in the swirling uncertainty of revolutionary times. Each customer who entered the establishment was automatically assessed for their potential role in the unfolding drama: ally, enemy, or merely another merchant pursuing their daily commerce in blissful ignorance of the historical forces gathering around them. The Grand Bazaar had always been a place where information was traded as readily as silk or spices, but never had intelligence been more valuable or dangerous than in these charged days of 1821. A commotion at the main entrance drew his attention. Mehmet Bey, one of the Sultan's intelligence officers, entered with the casual confidence of a man who knew his presence alone was enough to create unease among potential dissidents. His appearance was deliberately unremarkable: medium height, carefully trimmed beard, the prosperous robes of a successful merchant, but his eyes held the cold calculation of a professional hunter of men. The Ottoman intelligence services had evolved considerably since the days of Hassan Bey's patient surveillance in the 15th century. Modern methods emphasized infiltration over observation, using networks of informants and agents, provocateurs, to identify and eliminate threats before they could mature into serious challenges to imperial authority. The coffee houses, with their tradition of free discourse and political debate, had become particular targets of official attention. Mehmet Bey ordered coffee and settled at a table that provided clear sight lines to all three entrances, his positioning professional but not obviously defensive. To casual observers, he appeared to be simply another merchant taking a break from the day's negotiations. But Yanis recognized the subtle signs of surveillance, the way his eyes tracked movement without seeming to focus on any individual, the careful positioning that allowed rapid response to any threatening development. The appearance of the intelligence officer created an immediate dilemma. Yanis was expecting two crucial contacts within the next hour: Father Chrysanthos from the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate and Captain Demetrios Kalergis, who commanded a network of sympathizers within the Ottoman naval forces. Both men carried information vital to coordinating resistance activities with the uprisings that had begun in southern Greece. Their presence in the coffee house while Mehmet Bey maintained his surveillance could prove catastrophic. The solution required the delicate orchestration of seemingly natural events. Yanis caught the eye of Ahmed, the coffee house owner, and made a subtle gesture that activated long-established emergency procedures. Within minutes, a young apprentice had been dispatched through the back passages of the Bazaar, carrying coded messages that would redirect the expected contacts to alternative meeting sites. The revolutionary network's survival depended upon such contingencies, planned and rehearsed against the day when official attention became too dangerous to ignore. As the morning progressed, the coffee house filled with its usual mixture of merchants, scholars, and craftsmen seeking respite from the bazaar's commercial pressures. Conversations flowed in the careful patterns that had evolved during centuries of Ottoman rule. Political opinions expressed obliquely, criticisms disguised as historical observations, revolutionary sentiments hidden beneath layers of metaphor and allusion. But today, even these cautious discussions carried undercurrents of excitement and fear that reflected the empire's increasingly precarious situation. A silk merchant from Bursa dominated one corner table with animated descriptions of his recent travels, but his seemingly commercial narrative carried multiple coded messages for those trained to interpret them. References to unusual demand for certain luxury goods indicated increased Ottoman military activity in the provinces. Complaints about unreliable suppliers suggested that local authorities were becoming suspicious of merchant networks, and his casual mention of promising new markets conveyed optimism about revolutionary prospects in previously quiescent regions. Mehmet Bey listened to these conversations with the patient attention of a professional intelligence gatherer, occasionally contributing seemingly innocent questions that probed for more detailed information. His technique was masterful: questions framed as commercial inquiries, follow-up requests disguised as personal curiosity, leading statements designed to elicit unguarded responses from subjects who believed themselves engaged in ordinary social discourse. The tension in the coffee house continued to build throughout the morning, fed by the constant awareness that revolutionary conspiracy and imperial surveillance were conducting their deadly dance within arm's length of each other. Every conversation carried the potential for revelation or betrayal. Every casual gesture might be interpreted as significant by watching eyes. The atmosphere grew thick with unspoken dangers and hidden meanings, transforming the familiar space into a battlefield of wits and will. Salvation came from an unexpected source. Konstantinos Paleologou, descendant of the Elena who had once eavesdropped on Ottoman intelligence meetings, entered the establishment with the measured steps of a man bearing important news. His family had maintained their resistance activities across 3 centuries, adapting their methods to each new generation of Ottoman rule while preserving their ultimate commitment to Orthodox Christian liberation. Konstantinos approached Yanis's table with the familiarity of an old business associate, carrying a leather portfolio that suggested legitimate commercial purposes. "My friend," he said in Greek, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "I bring samples of the finest carpets from Smyrna pieces that will certainly interest your European customers." The coded language was immediately understood by both men. Carpets indicated military intelligence. Smyrna suggested the situation in the rebellious southern provinces, and European customers referenced the foreign support that the Greek Revolution desperately needed to survive. But the conversation would need to be conducted with extreme care, given Mehmet Bey's obvious presence and attention. "Please, sit and show me what you have brought," Yanis replied, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I am always interested in quality merchandise, especially if the prices reflect current market conditions." Konstantinos opened his portfolio and began displaying actual carpet samples, using them as props for a conversation that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. To casual observers, they appeared to be conducting ordinary commercial negotiations. To Mehmet Bey, their discussion might suggest involvement in the carpet trade that connected Constantinople to the rebellious provinces. But to Yanis, the real information lay in the careful selection and arrangement of the samples, each pattern and color combination conveying specific intelligence about revolutionary activities. "This red pattern from Kalamata has become quite popular recently," Konstantinos observed, holding up a carpet fragment that glowed like dried blood in the coffee house's dim light. "Local producers report unprecedented demand, though they face certain supply difficulties that may limit future availability." The message was clear. The uprising in the Morea was proceeding successfully, but the revolutionaries faced critical shortages of arms and ammunition. European support had been promised but not yet delivered, leaving the Greek forces vulnerable to the Ottoman counteroffensive that would inevitably come once the empire marshaled its resources for a proper military response. And this blue design from the islands, Konstantinos continued, displaying another sample, shows remarkable innovation in traditional patterns. The weavers have discovered new techniques that allow them to work independently of mainland suppliers. Island independence was progressing well, with local naval forces proving capable of challenging Ottoman maritime control. The Aegean archipelago was effectively becoming a Greek lake, providing bases for revolutionary operations and havens for refugees fleeing imperial retaliation in the mainland provinces. Their coded conversation continued for nearly an hour, transferring a wealth of intelligence through the medium of commercial discussion. Each carpet sample revealed another aspect of the revolutionary situation: military developments, political negotiations, foreign diplomatic activities, and the countless practical challenges of transforming a secret conspiracy into an organized rebellion. Mehmet Bey observed these proceedings with increasing suspicion, his trained instincts recognizing patterns that suggested more than routine commercial activity. The intensity of their discussion, the careful way they handled the carpet samples, and the occasional words in dialect that didn't quite match standard commercial terminology, all contributed to his growing certainty that he was witnessing some form of clandestine communication. The intelligence officer's dilemma mirrored that faced by his predecessors across the centuries. Should he act immediately on his suspicions, risking the arrest of potentially innocent merchants on insufficient evidence? Or should he maintain surveillance, hoping to gather more definitive proof while risking the loss of valuable intelligence or the escape of dangerous conspirators? His decision was influenced by the broader political situation. With revolutionary activities spreading throughout the empire's southern provinces, the authorities were under enormous pressure to demonstrate their effectiveness in countering the conspiracy. Arrests and interrogations had become daily occurrences in Constantinople, as the government sought to root out the networks that had somehow organized a rebellion under their very noses. As Konstantinos concluded his presentation and prepared to depart, Mehmet Bey made his choice. Rising from his table with deceptive casualness, he approached the main entrance and signaled to Confederates waiting in the Bazaar's corridors. Within moments, the coffee house would be surrounded, its exits blocked by Ottoman security forces prepared to arrest anyone suspected of revolutionary sympathies. But the Greek conspirators had not survived 3 centuries of Ottoman rule without developing sophisticated survival instincts. Yanis noticed Mehmet Bey's movements immediately and activated the coffee house's final contingency, a prearranged fire that would create confusion and provide cover for emergency escapes. Ahmed, the establishment's owner, had long ago prepared for such moments, installing concealed braziers that could be quickly ignited to produce dense smoke and apparent accidental combustion. The fire began in the back storeroom, spreading with suspicious rapidity through materials that had been carefully prepared to burn quickly and produce maximum concealing smoke. Customers began shouting and rushing toward the exits as thick clouds filled the coffee house's interior spaces. In the confusion, Yanis and Konstantinos slipped through a concealed passage that connected to the Bazaar's ancient network of service tunnels. The Ottoman security forces arrived to find a legitimate fire that had apparently consumed a substantial portion of the coffee house's interior, along with any evidence of the conversations that had taken place within its walls. The carpet samples had been reduced to ash. The participants had vanished into the bazaar's labyrinthine passages, and Mehmet Bey was left with nothing but suspicions and the certainty that he had witnessed something significant. As emergency crews worked to contain the fire, Yanis and Konstantinos made their way through passages that had served smugglers, spies, and conspirators for generations. The ancient stones seemed to welcome them, providing shelter and concealment as they had for countless others who found themselves caught between imperial authority and revolutionary necessity. The Grand Bazaar's endless corridors offered sanctuary to those who understood its secrets, just as it had since the days when Byzantine merchants had first hidden their gold from conquering Ottoman armies. Hours later, in a safe house located in the Fenar district, the two conspirators finally had the opportunity to complete their interrupted intelligence exchange. The information Konstantinos had brought was even more encouraging than his coded carpet display had suggested. The revolution was succeeding beyond the most optimistic projections, with organized Greek forces controlling substantial territories and foreign support beginning to materialize in tangible forms. The British have promised naval assistance, Konstantinos reported, his voice barely above a whisper despite the secure surroundings. Not openly, of course, but their fleet commanders have received instructions to misunderstand Ottoman requests for cooperation in suppressing piracy. Russian gold is flowing through Odessa, and French military advisors have begun appearing in the islands under various commercial pretexts. The news represented a fundamental shift in the revolutionary struggle's strategic situation. What had begun as a desperate gamble by secret societies and local insurgents was evolving into an international conflict that could reshape the balance of power throughout southeastern Europe. The Grand Alliance that had defeated Napoleon was fracturing along religious and geopolitical lines, with Orthodox Russia and maritime Britain finding common cause against Ottoman control of strategic waterways. For Yanis and his fellow conspirators in Constantinople, these developments offered both hope and danger. Success in the provinces increased pressure on the imperial government to root out revolutionary networks in the capital itself. Every day brought new arrests, interrogations, and executions as the authorities sought to demonstrate their control of the domestic situation. The coffee house fire had bought them time, but also marked them as targets for intensified surveillance and investigation. As night fell over the great city, the two men began planning the next phase of their operations. The revolution's success would require careful coordination between activities in the rebellious provinces and support networks in Constantinople. Intelligence needed to flow both ways. Revolutionary commanders needed information about Ottoman military preparations, while the capital's conspirators required detailed knowledge of revolutionary capabilities and foreign support. The Grand Bazaar would continue to play its ancient role as a hub of commerce and conspiracy, though the methods would need to evolve to match the heightened security environment. New meeting places would be established, different codes developed, alternative communication channels opened. The eternal dance between authority and resistance would continue, played out against the backdrop of marble columns and vaulted ceilings that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. Outside their safe house, Constantinople settled into an uneasy sleep, punctuated by the distant sounds of patrols and the occasional shout of sentries maintaining their vigilance against revolutionary threats. The city's Greek population lived under a cloud of suspicion that could descend into violence at any moment. But within the ancient walls of the Grand Bazaar, the seeds of future conspiracies were already being planted, tended by merchants who understood that commerce and revolution had always been intimate partners in the endless human struggle for freedom and prosperity. The late afternoon sun slanted through the Grand Bazaar's high windows, casting long shadows that seemed to reach across the decades like fingers of memory. October 16th, 1854, found the ancient marketplace buzzing with an energy born of war and opportunity in equal measure. The Crimean conflict had drawn the great powers of Europe into a complex dance of alliance and enmity, with the Ottoman Empire finding itself unexpectedly aligned with Britain and France against the Russian bear that had threatened its northern borders for generations. Alexander Vorontsov adjusted his merchant's robes with the practiced ease of a man who had spent 15 years perfecting the art of concealed identity. As a colonel in the Russian Imperial Intelligence Service, he should have been serving with the army besieging Sevastopol, but his linguistic abilities and intimate knowledge of Ottoman society made him far more valuable as a deep cover agent in the enemy capital. The irony of his situation was not lost on him. He was fighting for Russia's interests while disguised as a loyal Ottoman subject, surrounded by allies who would execute him without hesitation if they discovered his true identity. The war had transformed the Grand Bazaar's traditional rhythms in subtle but significant ways. Military contracts brought unprecedented profits to merchants who could supply the Allied armies with everything from boots to bullets, while the constant flow of foreign officers and diplomatic personnel created new opportunities for those skilled in the delicate arts of information gathering and influence peddling. The marketplace had always thrived on conflict and uncertainty, but never had the stakes been higher or the rewards more lucrative. Vorontsov's cover identity as Alexander Effendi, a successful importer of Russian furs and amber, provided perfect access to both Ottoman officials and European military personnel. His supposed business relationships with Russian suppliers gave him plausible reasons for maintaining detailed knowledge of conditions in enemy territory, while his Ottoman citizenship shielded him from the suspicion that naturally attached to obvious foreigners during wartime. The deep cover had taken years to establish, but it was now paying dividends in the form of intelligence that could potentially alter the war's outcome. Today's mission carried particular significance. Intelligence reports from the Crimean front suggested that the Allied siege of Sevastopol was approaching a critical phase, with British and French engineers preparing massive underground mines that could destroy the fortress's key defensive positions. If Russian forces could be warned of the exact timing and location of these mining operations, defensive countermeasures might be prepared that could break the siege and transform the war's strategic balance. The information had come through a chain of sources that demonstrated the international complexity of 19th century espionage. A French engineer, disgruntled by delayed promotion and mounting gambling debts, had sold details of the mining operations to a British businessman who was secretly working for Austrian intelligence. The Austrians, maintaining careful neutrality while favoring Russian interests, had passed the intelligence to Vorontsov through coded correspondence hidden in seemingly routine commercial documents. But transmitting such valuable information to Russian commanders required more than conventional diplomatic channels. Ottoman authorities monitored all official communications with suspicious enemy territory, while the Allied military presence in Constantinople made any obvious intelligence activities extremely dangerous. The solution lay in the Bazaar's ancient network of merchants and traders, men whose commercial relationships transcended political boundaries and whose loyalty could be purchased with sufficient incentives. Vorontsov's destination was the establishment of Hagop Balian, an Armenian jeweler whose family had served as intermediaries between competing powers for 6 generations. The Balians had survived and prospered by maintaining strict neutrality in political conflicts, while providing essential services to all sides in the endless struggles that swept across their homeland. During the current war, Hagop had simultaneously supplied jewelry to Russian officers, Ottoman officials, British diplomats, and French generals, treating each customer with equal courtesy and discretion. The jewelry shop occupied a prime location near the bazaar's center, where the corridors of precious stones and metals created a glittering maze that attracted customers from across the known world. Hagop himself was a small, precise man whose mild manner concealed both enormous expertise in his craft and considerable skill in the more delicate art of managing information. His establishment had served as a neutral meeting ground for conflicting parties throughout the current conflict, earning him the trust of intelligence officers from multiple nations. "Peace be upon you, Alexander Effendi," Hagop said as Vorontsov entered the shop, his greeting carrying the formal courtesy that marked all important transactions. "I trust your recent travels have been profitable. The markets for luxury goods remain strong despite the uncertainties of our current situation." "Indeed," Vorontsov replied, settling into the chair that Hagop indicated near a display case filled with emeralds from the Urals. "Though some suppliers face increasing difficulties with their delivery schedules, I seek your advice about alternative arrangements that might prove more reliable." The coded language established the nature of their transaction. Vorontsov needed secure communication channels to Russian territory, while Hagop's mention of market conditions indicated that such services remained available despite wartime complications. The negotiation that followed would determine both the price of the service and the specific methods to be employed. "Alternative arrangements can indeed be made," Hagop confirmed, beginning to examine a selection of rings with the professional attention that provided cover for more sensitive discussions. "I maintain relationships with craftsmen throughout the northern provinces, skilled artisans whose work commands premium prices in the most discerning markets. 5. Their services require substantial investment, but the quality justifies the expense." The jeweler's network extended through the Caucasus regions and into Russian territory through a chain of Armenian merchants who had maintained their commercial relationships despite the war. Messages could be concealed within jewelry shipments, coded into seemingly routine business correspondence, or transmitted through the ancient system of merchant signals that had evolved over centuries of cross-border trade. As they discussed the technical details of message transmission, neither man noticed the figure that had taken position near the shop's entrance. Captain James Morrison of Her Majesty's Royal Engineers represented the latest generation of British intelligence operatives, men trained in the scientific methods that were revolutionizing the espionage profession. Unlike his predecessors, who had relied primarily on intuition and personal networks, Morrison employed systematic surveillance techniques and analytical methods borrowed from military reconnaissance. The British officer had been tracking Vorontsov for 3 weeks, following a trail of suspicious activities and anomalous behavior patterns that suggested hidden loyalties. Modern intelligence work emphasized the careful accumulation of evidence rather than dramatic confrontations, building comprehensive profiles of suspect individuals through patient observation and analysis. Morrison's notebook contained detailed records of Vorontsov's movements, associates, and commercial activities, creating a pattern that increasingly suggested covert intelligence operations. Inside the jewelry shop, Vorontsov was completing his arrangements with the careful precision that had kept him alive through 15 years of dangerous assignments. The intelligence about Allied mining operations would be encoded using a cipher based on commercial jewelry terminology hidden within a routine order for amber ornaments that Hagop's northern suppliers might reasonably be expected to provide. The message would travel through established commercial channels that had operated throughout the war, carried by merchants whose neutrality was guaranteed by their value to all sides in the conflict. "The amber pieces you describe sound quite suitable," Vorontsov said, finalizing the coded arrangements. "I trust your northern craftsmen can deliver them within the timeline we discussed? My customers are particularly eager to receive these items before the season changes." Hagop nodded gravely, understanding that the timing reference indicated the extreme urgency of the intelligence transmission. The mining operations were scheduled to begin within days, leaving minimal time for the message to reach Russian commanders and for defensive preparations to be organized. The success or failure of the entire mission would depend upon the speed and security of the communication network that he had spent decades developing and maintaining. "Certainly," the jeweler replied. "My most reliable couriers will ensure prompt delivery. The northern routes remain open despite recent complications in the transportation sector. Your amber will reach its destination within the specified period." As Vorontsov prepared to leave, Morrison made his crucial decision. The accumulated evidence suggested that he was witnessing a significant intelligence operation, but direct intervention carried substantial risks. Arresting Vorontsov without definitive proof might eliminate a dangerous enemy agent, but it could also compromise British relationships with Ottoman authorities and Armenian commercial networks that provided valuable services to the Allied war effort. The captain chose a middle course that reflected the sophisticated approach of modern intelligence operations. Rather than immediate arrest, he would intensify surveillance while simultaneously working to intercept and decode the messages that Vorontsov was clearly preparing to transmit. If successful, this approach would not only neutralize enemy intelligence, but potentially turn it to British advantage by feeding false information through the compromised network. Vorontsov left the jewelry shop with the satisfied demeanor of a merchant who had concluded profitable business, but his trained instincts immediately detected the subtle signs of surveillance. Morrison's technique was professional, but the Russian agent's years of experience had taught him to recognize the almost imperceptible patterns that marked systematic observation. The knowledge that he was being watched added another layer of complexity to an already dangerous mission. The ancient corridors of the Grand Bazaar provided the perfect environment for counter-surveillance operations. Vorontsov began a carefully choreographed journey through the marketplace's maze-like passages, using reflective surfaces crowd dynamics, and architectural features to identify and assess his watchers. The techniques he employed had evolved from centuries of espionage activities in these same corridors, refined through generations of agents who had learned to use the Bazaar's unique characteristics for concealment and deception. The cat-and-mouse game continued throughout the afternoon, with pursuer and pursued demonstrating the sophisticated skills that marked professional intelligence work in the middle of the 19th century. Morrison maintained his surveillance with admirable persistence, adapting his methods to the Bazaar's challenging environment, while avoiding the obvious mistakes that would alert his target to the extent of British knowledge. But Vorontsov's superior familiarity with the marketplace's hidden geography gradually allowed him to gain advantages that professional skill alone could not overcome. As evening approached and the Bazaar's daily rhythms began shifting toward closure, both men faced critical decisions that would determine the mission's outcome. Vorontsov needed to activate his communication network before Morrison could organize intervention, while the British officer sought to maintain surveillance long enough to identify all participants in the suspected espionage ring. The stakes extended far beyond individual success or failure. The intelligence at stake could potentially save thousands of Russian lives and alter the war's strategic balance. The resolution came through an unexpected intervention. Maria Paleologu, the latest inheritor of her family's resistance traditions, had been monitoring British intelligence activities as part of a Greek conspiracy to exploit the war's chaos for their own nationalist purposes. Her ancestors had survived Ottoman rule by adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining their ultimate goals, and she continued that tradition by playing all sides against each other in pursuit of Greek independence. Maria's appearance at a strategic intersection forced Morrison to choose between maintaining surveillance of Vorontsov and pursuing this new intelligence target whose activities might pose separate threats to British interests. The momentary confusion created by this unexpected complication allowed Vorontsov to disappear into the Bazaar's network of service passages, escaping surveillance, while leaving Morrison with the frustrating knowledge that a significant intelligence operation had slipped through his fingers. Hours later, in a safe house near the Golden Horn, Vorontsov completed the final preparations for transmitting his intelligence to Russian commanders. The message about Allied mining operations was encoded using methods that had been tested in previous missions, hidden within commercial documents that would travel through Hagop's network of Armenian merchants. If successful, the intelligence would reach Sevastopol within days, potentially allowing Russian engineers to prepare countermines that could devastate the Allied siege works. But the escape from British surveillance had come at a cost. Morrison's investigation had revealed enough about Vorontsov's activities to compromise future operations, while the obvious presence of enemy intelligence agents would certainly intensify security measures throughout Constantinople. The successful completion of this mission would likely mark the end of Vorontsov's effectiveness as a deep-cover agent, forcing his extraction before British authorities could organize a comprehensive manhunt. As the coded message began its journey through the ancient network of merchants and traders that connected the Grand Bazaar to the furthest reaches of the known world, the marketplace settled into its evening quiet with the eternal rhythms that had marked its existence across the centuries. Wars might rage and empires might clash, but the fundamental human activities of commerce, conspiracy, and survival continued unchanged within these ancient walls. The Crimean conflict was merely the latest chapter in an endless story of competing loyalties and hidden agendas played out against the backdrop of history's most magnificent marketplace. The intelligence that Vorontsov had transmitted would indeed reach Russian commanders, contributing to defensive preparations that prolonged the siege of Sevastopol and cost the Allies thousands of additional casualties. But the price of success would ultimately prove too high. British counterintelligence operations, guided by Morrison's meticulous investigation, would eventually roll up the entire network, ending careers and lives with the cold efficiency that marked modern warfare. In the Grand Bazaar's eternal balance between success and failure, victory and defeat, the ancient stones absorbed another layer of secrets that would join the countless others hidden within their silent embrace. The autumn rain drummed against the Grand Bazaar's ancient roof with a persistence that seemed to echo the dissolution of empires. November 5, 1918, found the great marketplace caught between worlds, the Ottoman Empire gasping its last breath, while the victorious Entente powers prepared to carve up its territories like merchants dividing a particularly valuable shipment. Within the bazaar's familiar corridors, the same eternal dance of commerce and conspiracy continued, but now it carried the desperate urgency of men and women who understood they were witnessing the end of an age. Lieutenant Colonel T.E. Lawrence moved through the spice merchant's quarter with the careful steps of a man who had learned to read danger in every shadow and opportunity in every chance encounter. His Arab robes had been exchanged for the civilian clothes of a minor British diplomat, but his eyes retained the hard alertness that had carried him through the desert campaigns that had helped bring the Ottoman Empire to its knees. Today's mission was perhaps more delicate than any he had undertaken during the war, negotiating the secret transfer of documents that could reshape the post-war settlement of the Middle East. The documents in question lay hidden in the establishment of Ismail Kemal, an Albanian merchant whose family had served as intermediaries between competing powers since the days of Skanderbeg. For 4 years, Kemal had walked the razor's edge between Ottoman loyalty and Albanian nationalism, providing intelligence to both sides, while protecting his community's interests in the chaos of collapsing imperial authority. Now, with the war's end approaching, he possessed something that could determine whether the Albanian territories would achieve independence or be divided among the victorious powers like spoils of conquest. The bazaar's atmosphere reflected the uncertainty that gripped the entire city. Merchants whispered nervously about the future, their conversations mixing commercial concerns with political speculation about which authority would ultimately control their ancient marketplace. British and French officials moved through the corridors with the confident bearing of conquerors, while Ottoman administrators conducted their business with the desperate efficiency of men trying to preserve what little remained of their crumbling authority. Lawrence paused at a stall selling carpets from Anatolia, using the legitimate commercial interaction to survey his surroundings for signs of surveillance. The techniques of covert operation had evolved considerably since the simple disguises and coded conversations of earlier centuries, but the fundamental principles remained unchanged: patience, observation, and the ability to blend seamlessly into the marketplace's eternal rhythms. Modern intelligence work required scientific precision, but it still depended ultimately upon the ancient human skills of deception and manipulation. The carpet merchant, an elderly Turk whose family had operated from this location for over 2 centuries, displayed his wares with the automatic courtesy that had survived the collapse of the world around him. 5. These pieces represent the finest traditions of our craft, he said in accented French, recognizing Lawrence as a European customer despite his careful attempt at disguise. Each pattern tells a story that has been passed down through generations of master weavers. Indeed, Lawrence replied, allowing his fingers to trace the intricate designs while his eyes continued their systematic surveillance. I am particularly interested in pieces that represent historical significance, items that have witnessed important events and carry within them the memory of changing times. The merchant's eyes sharpened slightly at the carefully chosen words, recognizing the coded language that had become common among those dealing in more than ordinary merchandise. Such pieces are rare and valuable, he replied cautiously. They require special handling and discretion in their presentation to discerning customers. Their conversation established Lawrence's credentials as someone involved in the delicate trade of information and influence that had flourished in the war's final months. The bazaar had become a meeting ground for intelligence officers, diplomatic agents, and political representatives from a dozen different factions, each seeking advantages in the complicated negotiations that would determine the region's future. The ancient marketplace's neutrality made it ideal for such activities, providing a forum where enemies could meet under the protection of commercial convention. As Lawrence concluded his examination of the carpets, he noticed a familiar figure observing him from across the corridor. Dimitrios Paleologou, descendant of the long line of Byzantine conspirators, who had operated in these same passages for centuries, represented the latest generation of Greek nationalists seeking to exploit Ottoman weakness for their own purposes. The war had created unprecedented opportunities for ethnic minorities throughout the empire, and the Greeks were determined to secure maximum territorial gains from the impending peace settlement. The appearance of Demetrios complicated Lawrence's mission significantly. Greek intelligence services had developed considerable sophistication during the war, establishing networks throughout the Ottoman territories and maintaining close relationships with British and French authorities. If Greek agents had identified the importance of Lawrence's activities, they might attempt to intercept whatever documents he was seeking or demand inclusion in any negotiations that resulted from their acquisition. Lawrence made his way toward Ismail Kemal's establishment through a route designed to test whether he was being followed, using the Bazaar's complex geography to identify and assess potential surveillance. The techniques he employed represented centuries of evolution in covert movement, refined by generations of spies and conspirators who had learned to navigate these corridors without detection. Each turn, each pause, each apparent moment of commercial interest served multiple purposes in the delicate art of operational security. Kemal's shop occupied a strategic location near the intersection of several major passages, where the ancient Silk Road met the newer European trading corridors. The Albanian merchant had chosen the position carefully, understanding that successful intelligence operations required not just secure meeting places, but also multiple escape routes and clear sight lines for detecting approaching threats. His establishment sold a mixture of Albanian crafts and Ottoman antiquities, providing perfect cover for the more sensitive transactions that had become his specialty. "Colonel Lawrence," Kemal said quietly as the British officer entered the shop, using the military title despite Lawrence's civilian dress. "I have been expecting you. The items you requested have been prepared, though their acquisition required considerable effort and expense." The documents that Kemal had obtained represented one of the most significant intelligence coups of the war's final phase. Stolen from the personal files of Enver Pasha during the chaotic evacuation of Ottoman headquarters, they included detailed plans for a pan-Islamic uprising that could destabilize the entire Middle East if it fell into the wrong hands. More importantly for British interests, they contained evidence of secret negotiations between Turkish nationalists and Bolshevik agents, suggesting possible communist infiltration of the resistance movements that were beginning to emerge throughout Anatolia. "The complexity of the acquisition is understood and appreciated," Lawrence replied, settling into the chair that Kemal indicated near a display of traditional Albanian silver work. "I trust that the materials are complete and authentic." 05. My superiors require absolute certainty regarding their provenance and accuracy." Kemal nodded gravely and moved toward a cedar chest that contained his most valuable inventory. The documents were concealed within an elaborate manuscript illumination that depicted the conquest of Constantinople, their modern typewritten pages hidden beneath layers of ancient calligraphy that would pass casual inspection by Ottoman authorities. The concealment technique represented the latest evolution in document smuggling, combining traditional craftsmanship with modern intelligence requirements. As Kemal prepared to reveal the hidden documents, both men became aware of commotion in the corridor outside. Voices speaking rapid German indicated the presence of enemy intelligence operatives, members of the German military mission who remained in Constantinople despite their country's collapse, desperately seeking to salvage something from the wreckage of the Central Powers' defeat. Their presence suggested that Lawrence's mission had been compromised, possibly through the same networks that had made the document theft possible in the first place. The situation required immediate adaptation to changing circumstances. Lawrence signaled for Kemal to conceal the documents while he moved toward the shop's rear exit, preparing to implement emergency extraction procedures that had been rehearsed but never tested under actual operational conditions. The ancient Bazaar's labyrinthine passages would provide opportunities for evasion, but success would depend upon superior knowledge of the marketplace's hidden geography and the ability to move faster than pursuing enemies. The German agents entered Kemal's establishment with the aggressive confidence of men who had nothing left to lose. Major Klaus von Richter had spent 3 years building intelligence networks throughout the Ottoman Empire, and the war's end found him determined to prevent valuable assets from falling into British hands. His presence indicated that German intelligence had identified both Lawrence's mission and the importance of the documents he sought to acquire. "Herr Kemal," von Richter said in accented Turkish, his tone carrying the implicit threat that had marked German-Albanian relationships throughout the war. "We understand you have recently acquired certain historical manuscripts that might interest collectors from the Central Powers. Perhaps you would be willing to discuss the terms of their transfer to more appropriate custodians." Kemal's response demonstrated the diplomatic skills that had allowed his family to survive centuries of competing imperial claims on Albanian territory. "Honored guests," he replied with careful formality, "I am always pleased to serve discerning customers, but I must inform you that the manuscripts you reference have already been promised to another collector. Perhaps I could interest you in other pieces from my inventory." The delicate negotiations that followed were interrupted by the arrival of Dimitrios Paleologu and 2 associates, transforming the commercial establishment into a 4-way confrontation between competing intelligence services. Each party understood that the documents represented more than historical curiosities. They were political weapons that could influence the peace negotiations and determine the fate of millions of people throughout the crumbling Ottoman territories. "Gentlemen," Demetrios said with the aristocratic bearing that had marked his family for generations, "I believe we all seek the same items, and I propose that we consider the advantages of cooperation over conflict. These documents contain information that concerns all our peoples, and their ultimate disposition should perhaps be determined through negotiation rather than force." His suggestion reflected the sophisticated understanding of international relations that had allowed Greek nationalism to survive and flourish despite centuries of foreign domination. Rather than allowing the documents to fall exclusively into British hands, he proposed a complex sharing arrangement that would provide each party with copies while ensuring that no single power gained overwhelming advantage from their contents. The negotiations that followed demonstrated the intricate diplomatic skills that had evolved within the Grand Bazaar over centuries of commercial and political competition. Each participant brought different strengths and weaknesses to the discussion: British military power, German intelligence expertise, Greek diplomatic connections, and Albanian knowledge of local conditions. The ancient marketplace provided a neutral forum where these competing interests could be balanced and reconciled through the traditional methods of bargaining and compromise. Lawrence found himself in the position of representing not just British interests, but the broader Entente commitment to reshaping the Middle East according to strategic and ideological principles that often conflicted with local nationalist aspirations. The documents that Kemal possessed could provide crucial intelligence about Turkish resistance plans, but their acquisition had to be balanced against the need to maintain workable relationships with Albanian and Greek allies who would be essential for implementing post-war political arrangements. The solution that eventually emerged reflected the pragmatic wisdom that had governed commercial relationships in the Bazaar since its earliest days. The original documents would remain with Kemal as neutral custodian, while authenticated copies would be provided to each interested party upon payment of substantial fees that would compensate the Albanian merchant for his risks and expenses. This arrangement satisfied everyone's immediate needs while avoiding the zero-sum confrontation that could have destroyed the delicate web of relationships that sustained intelligence operations throughout the region. As the various parties concluded their agreements and prepared to depart, none noticed the slight figure that had been observing their negotiations from a concealed position near the shop's entrance. Sergeant Mustafa Kemal, an Ottoman officer who would later be known to history as Ataturk, had spent the afternoon conducting his own intelligence mission within the bazaar's ancient corridors. His presence indicated that Turkish nationalist forces were far more organized and informed than their enemies suspected, possessing intelligence networks that could monitor and counter foreign espionage activities. The future founder of modern Turkey had come to the Grand Bazaar seeking the same documents that had attracted international attention, but for different purposes. Rather than using them to influence peace negotiations or satisfy bureaucratic superiors in distant capitals, he intended to employ them as tools for organizing the resistance movement that would eventually challenge the post-war settlement and establish an independent Turkish state on the ruins of the Ottoman Empire. Mustafa Kemal's intervention changed the entire dynamic of the document transfer. His appearance forced all parties to recognize that their careful negotiations had been observed and analyzed by the very forces they sought to understand and control. The documents that seemed so valuable for planning counterinsurgency operations would now serve Turkish nationalists as guides for organizing exactly the kind of resistance that foreign powers hoped to prevent. "Gentlemen," Mustafa Kemal said, with quiet authority as he emerged from concealment, "I believe you have been discussing materials that belong properly to the Turkish people. As a representative of legitimate Ottoman authority, I must request their immediate transfer to appropriate custodians who can ensure their proper utilization for national purposes." His words carried implications that extended far beyond the immediate commercial transaction. The Ottoman Empire might be collapsing, but Turkish nationalism was emerging as a force that could challenge the post-war plans of all the foreign powers represented in Kemal's shop. The documents that had seemed to offer windows into Turkish weakness would instead become tools for organizing resistance that could frustrate Entente objectives throughout the Middle East. The confrontation that followed tested all participants' diplomatic skills and strategic understanding. Foreign intelligence officers found themselves negotiating with the representative of a movement they had dismissed as irrelevant, while Turkish nationalism demonstrated its capacity to operate effectively within the complex international environment that was emerging from the war's ruins. The ancient bazaar provided the perfect setting for this collision between imperial ambitions and nationalist aspirations, its neutral ground allowing competing visions of the future to be examined and tested through direct dialogue. The final resolution satisfied no one completely, but provided all parties with sufficient advantages to justify their participation. The documents would be copied and distributed according to Kemal's original proposal, but with the addition of Turkish nationalist representatives who would receive their own authenticated versions. This arrangement ensured that all major players in the region's future would possess the intelligence necessary for informed decision-making, while preventing any single party from gaining overwhelming advantages over their competitors. As evening fell over the Grand Bazaar and its ancient corridors settled into their familiar quiet, the participants in the day's complex negotiations dispersed to their respective headquarters, each carrying copies of documents that would influence the development of Middle Eastern politics for generations to come. The intelligence they had acquired would serve multiple purposes. British officials would use it to plan counterinsurgency operations. German agents would employ it to maintain influence despite their country's defeat. Greek nationalists would utilize it to advance territorial claims. Albanian leaders would apply it to secure independence, and Turkish resistors would transform it into guides for organizing the movement that would eventually expel foreign occupiers and establish the modern Turkish state. The day's events had demonstrated once again the Grand Bazaar's unique role as a neutral ground where competing forces could meet, negotiate, and reach accommodations that served everyone's interests while completely satisfying no one's ambitions. The ancient marketplace had survived the rise and fall of empires by adapting to changing circumstances while preserving the essential commercial and diplomatic functions that made it indispensable to all who sought to exercise power in the region. Lawrence's final report to his superiors would describe the mission as partially successful, noting that while the desired intelligence had been acquired, its distribution to other parties had limited its exclusive value to British interests. But his private assessment recognized that the day's events had provided something more valuable than exclusive intelligence, a demonstration of how post-war arrangements would need to accommodate the complex web of competing nationalisms that were emerging from the Ottoman Empire's collapse. The documents themselves would indeed prove significant in the years that followed. British authorities used them to plan operations against Turkish nationalist forces, while Turkish leaders employed them to understand and counter British strategies. Greek officials utilized them to support territorial claims at the Paris Peace Conference, while Albanian leaders referenced them in successful arguments for independence. The German copies found their way to Moscow, where they contributed to Soviet understanding of Middle Eastern developments and influenced the assistance that would eventually flow to Turkish nationalist forces. But perhaps the most important result of the day's negotiations was the precedent it established for the complex diplomatic arrangements that would characterize the region's politics throughout the 20th century. The Grand Bazaar had demonstrated that competing interests could be accommodated through patient negotiation and creative compromise, providing a model for the kind of multilateral diplomacy that would be necessary for managing the Middle East's transition from imperial control to national independence. As the last oil lamps flickered out in the bazaar's vaulted corridors, the ancient stones settled into sleep, carrying within them the memory of another day's drama in the eternal human story of commerce, conspiracy, and survival. Empires had risen and fallen, technologies had advanced, and political systems had evolved. But the fundamental patterns of human interaction remained unchanged. In the Grand Bazaar's timeless embrace, merchants and spies, diplomats and revolutionaries continued their ancient dance, weaving the threads of history with the patience and skill that had marked their predecessors across the centuries. The morning would bring new conspiracies and fresh opportunities, new empires and different enemies, but the Grand Bazaar would endure as it always had, adapting to changing circumstances while preserving the essential functions that made it the beating heart of one of the world's greatest cities. In its shadowed corridors and glittering stalls, the future was being negotiated one transaction at a time, just as it had been since the first merchants had gathered within its walls to trade in silk and spices, secrets and dream. And so our tales from the Grand Bazaar draw to their gentle close, like the last notes of a merchant's song echoing through marble corridors at day's end. From the silk merchant's Byzantine secrets to the final Ottoman conspiracy, we have wandered through 5 centuries of human drama played out against the backdrop of history's most magnificent marketplace. Each generation brought its own ambitions and fears, its own methods and technologies, but always the ancient rhythms remained, the eternal dance of commerce and conspiracy, loyalty and betrayal, survival and success that has marked human civilization since its earliest days. The Grand Bazaar stands today much as it stood when Demetrios first hid his documents beneath bolts of crimson silk, its vaulted ceiling still echoing with the voices of merchants and customers, its ancient stones still warm with the footsteps of those who seek their fortunes in its shadowed halls. The empires that once commanded its allegiance have crumbled into memory. The spies who once walked its corridors have long since returned to dust, but the marketplace itself endures, adapting to each new age while preserving the essential functions that have made it indispensable across the centuries. In its endless passages, new conspiracies are doubtless taking shape even now, modern merchants pursuing contemporary intrigues with methods their predecessors would recognize despite the changed technologies and altered political circumstances. The fundamental human drives that brought Byzantine resistors and Ottoman spy masters, Greek revolutionaries and British intelligence officers to seek their goals within these walls continue to operate in our own time, manifesting in forms that would surprise and delight those earlier generations of schemers and dreamers. Sleep now, dear listener, and let these tales of distant times and exotic places carry you gently into the realm of dreams, where you too might walk through moonlit corridors lined with silk and silver, breathe air perfumed with cinnamon and cardamom, and perhaps encounter your own adventures in the Grand Bazaar's timeless embrace. For in dreams, as in the ancient marketplace itself, all possibilities remain open, all stories continue, and the eternal human quest for meaning and purpose finds its perfect expression in the simple act of trade, whether in goods or secrets, memories or hopes, the precious commodities that make life worth living. The bazaar sleeps, but never truly rests, For somewhere in its depths, a merchant is always counting his profits, a conspirator is always planning his next move, and a dreamer is always imagining what tomorrow might bring. In that endless cycle of hope and endeavor, we find the true magic of the Grand Bazaar, not in any single transaction or conspiracy, but in the eternal human capacity to begin again, to seek new opportunities, to weave new stories from the golden threads of possibility that shimmer always just beyond our reach. Rest well, and may your own dreams be filled with the gentle whisper of silk, the sweet fragrance of spices, and the soft murmur of ancient voices sharing their secrets across the centuries. For we are all, in our way, merchants in life's grand bazaar, trading in the currencies of experience and wisdom, seeking always the perfect transaction that will bring us home to ourselves. And in that seeking, we join the endless caravan of souls who have found their way to these magical halls, where every ending is also a beginning, and every story leads to another story, world without end.